Hey everyone, thanks for coming and welcome. We'll give another quick minute or so to see if folks are still trickling in and get started. Erica, just let me know when it's slowed down and we can go ahead and get going.
I think people are going to keep trickling in. We just jumped 10 and it's growing every second. So I say, let's just get it started and then people can join in as the presentation goes on.
Perfect. Hello everyone, nice to meet you. My name's Brent. I'm a coach on Leland and I'll be leading today's session on building a consulting case interview prep plan. Really excited for it. With this, we are kind of kicking off the Master the Case Day and segment of Leland's Management Consulting Week, which is exciting. This is the first session in what is a long day of a lot of different consulting case-related sessions. A lot of them will go deeper than this. This one's a bit more of a survey overview, I would say, of how to prep for case interviews themselves. I would encourage you to use the QR code and I think links in the chat to sign up for Leland. I will be giving away a free half-hour coaching session at the end of this session. But to get that, you've got to be signed up for Leland. So go ahead and sign up there if you haven't already. You will also get access to recordings of all these sessions in case you missed them, if you do that as well. I'd encourage you to turn your camera on if you would like to. But no need to. Understand it's middle of the workday for many of you. This session is going to be more for people getting started with their consulting interview prep, more for people exploring. But I will have roughly a 15-minute presentation, kind of giving the overview of what a consulting prep plan looks like, and then some time for Q&A at the end, where I'd encourage folks to ask questions, and we can use that time. I will say though, even if you think you're far along, you've already done practice cases, etc., I might have some pointers in here that still help. I think a lot of people jump too soon to the practice cases, so stay tuned if you're eager to hear more there. As a bit of an introduction, like I said, my name's Brent. I studied mechanical engineering and played baseball at Rice in undergrad, so I am a STEM major. Hopefully some of you are too. Most of my professional career was at Bain. My claim to fame, I was the first associate consultant in Bain's Austin office when it opened in 2020. I was in the Houston office before that. And currently at business school. I'm between first and second year at HBS. And also have some experience working at a sports tech startup. That's the WR logo that you see there, as well as this summer, as my business school internship, have been trying to build a sports tech startup of my own. On everything I'm talking about today, I do coach these things on Leland. The QR code on the right there brings you to my coaching profile. I also coach MBA admissions. And yeah, super flexible. I love coaching, but can touch on any of the things I touch on today and even more. Quick disclaimer before I get into my presentation, this is just one person's perspective. This is by no means the global absolute truth of what Bain & Company or Harvard Business School or anybody else thinks about how to prep for a consulting interview. It is more my take after both being an interviewer at Bain, helping people prep for interviews for years now, and going through the process myself and helping many friends and coaches through the process. But there's a lot of other coaches out there. Some have different perspectives, and I honestly encourage you to try to hear from as many of them as you can. So to get into the more formal presentation here really quick. So a lot of people ask, like, okay, where do I even start? How do I think of a plan to get ready for consulting interviews? Many of you, I assume, are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs from the field of psychology, where at the bottom is physiological needs, at the top is self-actualization. You kind of work your way up. I think it's similar in consulting prep. The whole point in Maslow's hierarchy is you wouldn't be focused on your self-actualization needs if you haven't yet figured out your physiological needs, like making sure you're well fed. I think it's similar in consulting. You shouldn't really be jumping to mock cases and real mock interviews if you don't fully understand what a case interview is, what the song and dance is, and everything along the way. And so I'll be stepping through each of these a little bit to tell you more, but I think you can use this as a framework for mapping out your plans for getting ready for the interviews. So to start on what is a case interview, I like to think of it as it's a little bit of a dance and you have to learn the steps first. You really have to build a foundation, because unless you've gone through prepping for management consulting interviews, you just straight up don't know what the actual interview is gonna be like, and every interviewer is going to expect you to kind of know these steps. I point to a lot of the classic case books, but also content on Leland Plus, or honestly, just like tons of great content out there just to get these basics down of what it is. But at the end of this, you should know, roughly how long is an interview, what's the typical flow, should I be taking notes, how should I be taking notes, can I use a calculator, what are the different types of cases I can expect, what's the vocab, like profit versus revenue, costs versus prices, like some of those things you want to just have nailed down before you get too much further. This is very much the eat your vegetables and do your homework phase. Second, this is often overlooked, but I think example case answers are really helpful. I always think of this as, would you really try to write a book before you could read and had read a bunch of books to even have a perspective on which ones you think are good? And all you're trying to do here is learn what good looks like. So again, sometimes a misstep, but I do think it's always worth spending time either on YouTube watching some of the good like case interview examples. There's also some on Leland and different Leland courses where you can watch folks actually do like experts do like a mock case, and you just watch and kind of see what good looks like. And some of these, like the diagram in the top right, sometimes these written out, flows of here's what the whole interview had. When you see them, it's like, wow, that's so simple and feels like a very easy answer. It's hard because you have to do this live and on the spot in your interview. But seeing a few of these, I think, gives you the bearing for what good looks like and helps you get through it yourself. The case starts. I kind of think of this as the training wheel step, but it's like a quick step before you actually go into real cases. But gosh, is it worth it? This was like my favorite version of prep that I did myself. What a case start is you dig into different case prompts, the same ones that you eventually will use to do your mock cases, but you only do the beginning. So you just read the case prompt, act as if somebody had just read that to you, take a few minutes to take notes on what your framework would be, how you would think about answering the question, the same way you would in a real case interview. Then try to build a framework from there. Actually practice like saying it out loud, maybe say it into a mirror, and then go ahead and like guess the final answer. And often there are kind of answer guides to the cases as you look at them. And so, even if you only spend 4 or 5 minutes with a case just from the start, try to guess the answer and then like go see the model answer and see how close you were. These are things you can do as like self-prep before you like get into preparation that involves somebody else as the interviewer. But gosh, it goes a long, long way, I think, because you can get through, 20 some cases in just like one sitting of going through it. And it just helps your recognition quite a bit. So I'd really recommend these case starts before you get into the real mock cases. Finally, though, there is the mock cases. This is kind of showtime. This is what everybody thinks about when they do case interview prep. I would say, though, be really thoughtful about how you practice. I always push quality over quantity here. I think there's different approaches on that. At the end of the day, it's whatever makes you comfortable and confident going into your interview. However, I think literally like a handful of high quality, like realistic mock case interviews with somebody in the interviewer chair that's done it before and knows what they're doing goes much longer than some people who race through multiple cases a day for weeks on end, but without the same quality and with, just maybe a friend who's not yet informed on what the case interview should look like. So I really push that quality over quantity. Also, just making it as real as possible is a great tip. Sometimes with a coach, it is helpful to kind of like break the is it the fourth wall or the third wall, but break the wall and kind of like pause and say like, okay, wait, can we talk about this really quick before I proceed? But for the most part, I think showing up, even like dressing and preparing and taking notes as if it's going to be the real interview you're going to do is really helpful. Varying case types here. So some common ones are market sizing, profitability cases, new market entry, the list goes on. From your prior prep, you should have kind of a bank of the different categories of cases and make sure you practice across all of them. And then make sure you get feedback. It's probably as important to spend like almost as much time as you do in the actual mock interview, just reviewing it. So tools like recording the interview and watching it back yourself, making sure that you get time with your coach or interviewer, whoever it is that's in the other chair, get enough time with them that you can actually like talk back and forth through it. And other things like that are all helpful tips to like build in the feedback and make sure that you're like getting everything you can out of the actual mock interview session. So a lot of you though, especially if you're already into mock cases, might be saying like, no way, that's it, Brent, that's pretty basic, which I don't disagree, it is. Still, I think the steps matter, but you might want to know where to go from here. And don't worry, there is kind of a gold star at the top for you as well. And that is kind of the mastering your craft step. Now, most of this happens like during your actual mock case interviews, and most of it is going to be individual. So I can't really like give broad tips of like what this is going to be, but almost everyone, if they've gone through this framework and gone through this prep plan, when they get into the mock cases, they realize there's that one thing that's just kind of sticking out as like the last hurdle for them to get over to like feel confident in the cases that they're doing. And so for some people, it's case math. For some people, it's getting the framework right. For others, it's just the communication style. A1 here is like an answer first, which a lot of the consulting firms use to say, you're supposed to communicate in this setting more by tell me the answer up front and then tell me the reasons. A lot of folks like myself from engineering backgrounds, that's backwards. Usually you have to like say all your evidence and then a conclusion. This flips it on its head. Whatever it is, these are actually like all the different sessions you can see in Consulting Week throughout the rest of today, or throughout the rest of the week with Leland. These are all the mastering your craft steps. And then sometimes when you're preparing for like a specific interview, there are some firm-specific strategies that you need to have. You can read up and work with coaches on the specifics of this, but for example, how like conversational versus formal, how much you should be leading versus letting the interviewer ask you questions and lead you through. Some of these vary a little bit by firm. These are all what I would say is the mastering your craft step. But all of this is a fantastic place to work with a coach on. And it's really all about identifying from your feedback, like where you need to go deeper and trying to iron that out so you're confident in your interview. Now, last part of the presentation, and then we'll get to the Q&A, is how much should you prep? Which is a question a lot of people ask. Often it's, hey, is this going to be a month, 2 months, 6 months? How long am I going to be doing it? And how long do I need? And does it change if I have different amounts of time? Unfortunately, I'm going to kind of dodge giving you a clear answer there. I think fact of the matter is you need to prepare however much it takes for you to be comfortable and confident heading into your interview. And sometimes there's just constraints. Sometimes you didn't realize that you were going to career pivot into consulting until 2 months before you need to be ready to interview. So often there's constraints like that, and all of that's okay. Like if you talk to enough consultants and former consultants, you'll know that everyone has their own story of what it looked like for them to prep. But regardless of the amount of time that you have, I would think of it as trading off risk for confidence. So the less you prepare, the more risk there is that a specific case is going to be like new to you or out of your wheelhouse or just like unpracticed. And the more that you prep, you're kind of trading off that risk, you're de-risking it for confidence. And that is kind of like the unfortunate truth is if you have a short amount of time, you maybe aren't going to get to do as much, but make sure that your prep, whatever it is very focused on that trade-off and building confidence. That would be my advice. What I can give though is I think for each of the steps, there's a little bit of like a gate, like a yes, no barrier of like, how do I know if I can move from the foundation step here to the next one up the ladder? And so I would argue that when you're done with, the kind of what is a case interview step, when you're at the point that you could tell a friend what a case interview is and what you do in each step of the case. Kind of simple, but like actually ask yourself that question at various points throughout your prep when you're going through these case books, when you're like Googling and all this other research, ask yourself that step. And once you're at a yes, you can move on to example case answers. If you can't get to a yes and there's been enough time, this is a great place to stop and engage a friend or a coach. But that is what I would say is the gate there. The next gate, when you're done with the example case answers, remember this is the step where you're watching YouTube or reading different kind of like model case answers, whatever it is. Like I said, all you're trying to do here is know what a good case interview looks like. And so here is the same thing of once you can get to a yes, that you clearly know what a good case interview looks like, this is when you can kind of move on to the next step. With case starts, now we're getting into like real questions about like how many of these should I do? I would say here, if you could confidently say, I'm rarely taken off guard by a case prompt, this is when you are comfortable enough to actually move into the real mock cases. So much of the case interview is about momentum, and that first impression really matters. And your confidence through the prompt as you hear it and the first things that you do in a case is huge in like building the relationship between you and the interviewer and moving on to the next steps of the case. And so this is big in terms of like, you want to read enough starts that they're never really taking you off guard and catching you on your back foot again. Typically for most people, this is like dozens of case starts, but it might be like 1 dozen or like many, many. The good thing is that these case starts, the way I've thought of them, are typically more, just a few minutes each. Lastly, I think, when are you done with mock cases? That's really up to you. It's just about confidence. So once you're feeling confident to walk into the interview, that is when I'd say you're ready to walk into the interview. But as I said earlier, for some people, this is, more like a handful of, really, really high quality case interviews. For other people, they need reps, and it's dozens. And that's kind of your call. And what I would say has to be iterative as you go through it. But again, I would go back to my urge earlier to like focus on quality over quantity, because I think that does get you there faster at this step. So that's it. That's the how to prep and how much to prep. Coaches again help at every stage of this, and at that very last one, wherever you're like, stuck and not feeling confident on one specific piece of it, that's where coaches are great to go deep on, for example, market sizing or like analyzing charts or the different things like that. Lastly, before the Q&A, I will leave you with some parting advice. First is, if you like this stuff, if you like even hearing about it, as you're reading case starts, you like really get into it. And if the interview process honestly like really lights you up, I would say this is a good job for you. Like, you can't really forget that like this is also kind of a two-way interview process where you're trying to get to learn. In my experience, the case interviews were a lot like the real job, maybe more so than other things I've interviewed for in the past. And so it's a pretty good signal. Second is, I always got this advice, and whenever I was in the interviewer chair, I feel the same way. A good case should feel like an engaging business conversation. That's kind of like the gold standard you're going for. Note that it does not say a good case feels like a robotic framework or a good case feels like anything else like that. I think if you and your interviewer can get a rapport and like show that you're both actually interested in exploring this business problem deeper and having a fun conversation around it, that's really what you're going for. Last thing I'll say, for all of my STEM majors, non-business majors, non-business background folks that are approaching consulting interviews from that, like I was, one tactical tip that I got was just to try reading parts of Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Financial Times, whatever kind of suits your fancy, and just see what's out there and see if you kind of understand what's being talked about. It's by no means a requirement for the consulting job, and there are certain things in there that are deeper on economics, deeper on finance than you would ever go as an early management consultant. But still, as somebody coming from outside of the business world, it is a helpful tip and just another place to kind of like get your feet wet in some of the terminology and what's going on. So that's all I've got. I'm going to flip to the next page, which allows for questions. But before I do want to say to everybody, thank you. Best of luck. Leland is a massive resource that I wish I had when I was going through the prep process. The rest of this week, the rest of this Master the Case day, everything is all fantastic. I hope you do all get to leverage this and go deeper on some of the specifics of the different pieces that I surveyed now. And if anyone's interested in coaching, I would love to chat, but also I would say there's like tons and tons of other amazing coaches on Leland. And really a lot of people have found like meeting with multiple is actually even the best answer. And so I encourage you to do so. But feel free to drop if you want now, if you don't have questions, but if you want to stay for Q&A, two options for you. You can either drop questions in the chat and I will try to grab them from there, or you're welcome to use the annotation tool if that works and fill in the box. And I will have to cut it off at the end of the hour, which is roughly 10 minutes from now. But for the next 10 minutes, happy to do Q&A and talk on that level. Okay, as y'all are filling in more questions, there was one question that came in directly to me through the chat about why I ended up going into consulting and if it made good use of my mechanical engineering degree. In short, yes, absolutely. I had done an engineering internship and was a little bit lost and bored and thought like, wait a second, I really like studying this, but I don't like the career I'm seeing. And I didn't see many folks even years ahead of me at the internship that kind of matched the job that I was hoping for the rest of my life. To be honest, it was just like too narrow scope of problems, and consulting was a great place to still do problem solving like engineers love to do, but do it on like a much more like instant and broad scope, because the problems you're dealing with are top of mind for C-suite level executives, and it's things that they want to implement right away. So that was the original attraction. Now, did the degree help? I say absolutely. Did I use like, statics and dynamics in some of my other deeper courses of mechanical engineering? No. But like, did I use the general problem solving skills and the skills of how to learn things that are like both technical and not? Absolutely. And continue to and think it's a great career for a lot of engineers. I think my incoming class from Rice when I was a new associate consultant was 8 or 9 people, and we were all engineering majors. So just a little bit of a tidbit. There's plenty of friends for you in consulting if you're coming from a similar background to me. Let me see what other questions in there. Yes, so a question on how do I know if the example cases I saw are good ones in order to move on to the next step? Yeah, so I would say just make sure that the source you're pulling these example cases from is reputable. I think Leland Plus is going to have lots of them soon, but there are a few other, like kind of tried and true case books and resources out there. I would say that like it's not that hard for people to find like the right case prompt per se. Like I think the prompt is often like kind of generic, and that's not necessarily like the hard part. If there are case prompts that are in industries that are like foreign to you, but you still are going to have to answer the question, that's a good sign, because that's where a lot of people like get stuck is, you expect that it's going to be a case about an industry, maybe like grocery shopping, because everybody does that. And then you show up and it's actually something like more industrial and weird. And yet you still have to like think on your feet and get through it. So that's just one test. But other than that, I wouldn't like focus too hard on like, is this the exact right case? Each of the firms typically has like a few practice cases on their website too. So that can give you a barometer for what a good case for them looks like as well. Just reading other questions. Hierarchy of case books and which one to start with and then on. So I don't have a favorite case book. I think there are many out there that are good. I think you don't need to go through all of them. I would instead say like use my suggested question of whether you can go on to the next step past just the case books and learning what a case interview is. Do I understand what a case interview is? And so the few that I showed, I know there's like hot takes on either side of whether it's good or bad for some of these books, like Case in Point or this, that, and the other. I don't put much weight into those. I actually would say like whichever of the books can help you understand kind of just the steps of the dance for a case interview is the right start. And as soon as you then fill in your gaps of what is a case interview with whatever inputs you need, then you'll be in a good spot. I would say I don't think you need to read like more than one or perhaps more than two of the actual case interview books. I think it becomes quickly redundant. However, if you get through a couple and it's still foreign to you, then sure, like they're there for your use. But I would more say if you've gotten through one and you still have big gaps on what a case interview is, that might be a good time to instead engage like a real human, like a coach through Leland or a former or current consultant to talk about it that way instead. Let me see some other questions. Do you think the most difficult part of getting into management consulting is figuring out case interviews? I actually do think that is the case for many people, but it's not the only piece. I think figuring out the case interviews is big, but like just as big is figuring out the more behavioral side of these interviews, which varies a bit more from firm to firm, but is just as important in the interview process because the firm is trying to assess whether you are a good fit for them. And often it's less of a, like somebody's showing they're a bad fit and more like somebody hasn't practiced or prepped enough for the interview to know how to put their best foot forward. And so that's another place I would say like you absolutely want to focus. And then there's like honestly like a whole aspect of just like the kind of networking and knowing like the processes and different steps to actually like get yourself into the application process. Hopefully some of the earlier parts of the week of this Leland Management Consulting Week have been helpful with that. But those are equal barriers for most people. But from a technical perspective, where people like kind of hit their last barrier, yes, the case interview is often foreign and often the hard part. Okay, question about like folks coming from non-business background who want to get into consulting and how to build the foundational business knowledge. I mentioned the kind of read Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Financial Times as one tactical tip. But I think there's lots of others out there. Sometimes in consulting, it's really like the technical aspects don't go too deep per se, especially in these case interviews. They're more like the nuts and bolts of business. And so different sources you can also do, or even thinking through like, if you were to start a small business today, how would you think about like whether or not it's successful? And some of these pieces of like, okay, I want the business to make money, breaking that down into revenue and costs, understanding the different drivers of those. These are things you're going to see in case interviews, but start to try to apply them to like small businesses around you in your community and think through that as well. And I find that to be helpful and kind of look for it everywhere, because once you've like gotten into it, you realize that these different business fundamentals are kind of apparent in everyday life as well. Okay. Let's see. How much are scrappy and unconventional frameworks okay versus the more rigid frameworks you tend to see? Is it okay to use unconventional and separate frameworks for each case? I like this question a lot. I think the frameworks like never have to like nail the exact like rigid framework. In some of these interviews, folks like to lean on the more classic frameworks, like if you've heard of Porter's 5 Forces or the 4 Ps of marketing or different things like that. That's by no means wrong, by no means a disqualifier, but most interviewers, I think, are less interested in whether you're familiar with these kind of textbook frameworks and more interested in, can you hear and really understand the question being asked in the case, put the path together to get to an answer to it, and then build a framework that supports that. And often I think there's like an underlying equation to some of these questions. For example, a lot of cases are like, hey, we want this business unit to do better and increase profits. The underlying equation there is like, I need profits to go up, which means I either need revenues to go up or costs to go down or both. And if you can kind of do a framework that's more around that, and then like, well, if I need revenues to go up, I need to understand, could I raise prices or somehow increase volume? And if I need costs to go down, I want to look at the costs and think about like where I could find efficiencies in either variable or fixed costs. Like I prefer that kind of framework, which I see as scrappy, and it's scrappy in the sense that like you think about the question being asked, say that you know how to answer it, and then break it into just the fundamental like elegant building blocks rather than like a massive sweeping framework that analyzes the business from all of the textbook possible directions that you could. And so in that case, I typically do like what could be called scrappy, but for me is a bit more just tailored frameworks that really answer the question at hand. Okay, sorry everyone, I know there's lots more cases, lots more questions in the chat, but unfortunately we are at time. So that's all we have time for today. If you have more questions, please reach out to me directly through Leland or to other coaches. Lots of resources to get your questions answered. And other than that, thank you everyone for your time. Thank you for joining, and hopefully this was helpful. I can't recommend enough the rest of Leland Management Consulting Week, especially this Master of the Case Day. So hope you get to enjoy the rest of these sessions as you go into it. All right, that's all. Thanks all.